I'm Kevin Power, and this is SaskScapes, the podcast featuring stories of arts, culture, and heritage in Saskatchewan. Welcome to episode 80 of SaskScapes. This episode is sponsored by the Saskatchewan History and Folklore Society. These great folks deliver programs and activities to celebrate and share the rich historical and folkloric knowledge for which Saskatchewan is known. Visit them at SHFS.ca and don't forget to stop by their Facebook page. And also, thanks to SaskCulture for your ongoing support of the SaskScapes podcast. Now, if you'd like to hear all of the SaskScapes episodes, it's really quite easy because you can find us everywhere on the internet. You can find us in the iTunes Store, Google Play, the Android app for SaskScapes, Libsyn Radio, Stitcher Radio, iHeartCulture.ca, TuneIn Radio. Well, just Google SaskScapes and you can't help but find an episode somewhere that will interest you. And of course, we always like your feedback, so many of these places give you the opportunity to give a star rating or write a comment. We love that. We like to hear what you think. And let's face it, it boosts the ratings of the show and moves it higher to the top of the popular podcast list. And who doesn't like to be popular? Okay, life is a story, so tell it well. That's what this episode is all about. In celebration of Culture Days 2016, it's time for another open mic story sharing hour. In this live recorded episode, you'll hear stories that range from road trips to social justice and everything in between. First up is CBC journalist Dan Zakreski. Dan shares the pitfalls of multitasking, fires, and, well, hair products gone wrong.
Okay, my name is Dan Zakreski. And I want to share with you a rock and roll parable from my life that taught me some interesting lessons. By the time I was 30, I was a reporter at the Star Phoenix. I'd been there for about 10 years, and I was just coming into my own as a journalist. I was understanding some of the possibilities of the job, the fun things that you could do. I was also married and had a new house and had 2 little kids, and I was very deep into a martial arts program. I was a busy guy. So you can imagine my surprise when I woke up one morning at age 33 and realized that I was also playing in a rock and roll band. It had started quite innocently enough. I had 6 friends, and we would get together on Saturday nights and jam in the drummer's garage on Main Street, just off of Broadway. And as things happen, friends talk to friends, and it turned into a full-blown house party. Now, you can imagine, I was 33 years old. I'd never been in a band before in my life. I barely drank, and I was suddenly thrown into this structured mayhem. And it was just wonderful. So every Saturday night, we'd get together, and everybody from the neighborhood would come. On this particular summer weekend, we had a group of guys come from a band we knew called the Lucky Dogs. These were guys we had shared a billing with at a couple of small gigs. And the drummer was a guy named Brent. I won't give his last name. And he had the most spectacular young John Mellencamp explosion of chestnut hair that you could imagine. And I had hair back then as well. And it wasn't hair like that. So it was just awesome. So they show up at our gig garage at 11 o'clock. We're well into our cups, and he walks in, and he's got blonde hair like Brad Pitt from Legend of the Fall. It's just this honey blonde explosion. So I'm drunk, and I'm on him right away. Brent, what did he do to your hair? And he goes, I used this product called Sun-In. I'm going, gimme, do you got some? Where can I get this? And he goes, I have some with me. So he whips out this bottle. Now, I don't know what the application rate is for Sun-In, but I can tell you how much I used. I hosed myself down with the full bottle. It was just, I looked like a wet dog. And of course, nothing happened. We were drunk, and it soon enough dried into sort of a spilt ginger ale helmet. Well, fast forward 6 hours. I'm working the weekend, which I didn't mention. 7 o'clock in the morning, phone rings on the landline next to my head. It's work. There's a huge fire at Langham. I gotta go. So I jump up, throw on my rock and roll clothes, and grab my go bag. At this point, I was smart enough to always have a bag with a camera, notebook, batteries, map, all my stuff in it. So I just grabbed it and went. Now, I got to tell you, the one thing about being a reporter and a fire is there's nothing better in the world than a big fire. Out of all the things I've covered over the decades, because it's got everything. Like a really big fire, it's visual, it's got noise, it's got people running around, there's drama, there's human emotion. It's just the rocket ride, unless somebody dies. And then it turns to shit on you in a heartbeat, because then immediately you're thinking, man, would I want to die in a fire or drown or get shot? And it's happening because it's right there. So I'm racing out to Langham, and of course by the time I get there, no cell phone. I find out that in fact somebody has died. And it gets really somber all of a sudden, because half of the downtown is burning. All these businesses are linked building to building to building. So I get there, and I sort of go into triage mode. I find the fire chief, and it's a small town guy, a volunteer who looks like the old fat guy from the oatmeal commercials, Wilfred Brimley. He's got the big mustache. He probably ran the butcher shop, and he's got his helmet on sideways. And he's kind of standoffish, but he understands I just have a job to do. So he says, yeah, we have somebody dead. It was over there, and there's a bunch of volunteer guys standing there holding a blue tarp in front of the body. They always shield the body. So I go do my thing. For the next hour, I run around. With fires, you don't have sophisticated cameras, so you got to get up close. So you're shooting all the angles. I'm talking to people. After about an hour, I get it wrapped up, so I'm going to check in with the fire chief on the way out. And I get there. And as I'm walking there, like, I can be a rammy guy. Like, as a reporter, you got to, I have the right to know this. But even by my standards, people are standoffish with me. All the volunteer firefighters are kind of giving me stink eye, and I'm thinking, well, shit, did I go too close to the tarp? Did I ask somebody the wrong question? And I get to the fire chief, and he won't even look me in the eye. He's just kind of mumbling and giving me answers. So I think, well, this is just how it went down. So I go to leave, and I'm walking by a plate glass window, and my hair is completely white. The Sun-In that I put in the night before was heat activated. It's hydrogen peroxide. So over the course of the morning, I showed up with chestnut hair, and then all these guys watched me turn into an albino. And nobody had any idea if I had PTSD, like what was going to happen. So my takeaway from that personally was, don't do two stupid things at once. Okay? If you're going to experiment with hair products, check the label. Barring that, don't go to a big fire. Thank you very much for your attention. That's my story.
You just set it on the chair. Thanks. The SaskScapes podcast does not endorse Sun-In or any hair product. Next, we hear from storyteller Danica Lorer, who speaks on the rich connection she has with her family and the power of the story to connect us all.
Well, I'm Danica Lorer, and I'm a storyteller. It's what I get paid to do. I'm the luckiest person in this province. And this month, I'm actually spending time throughout Saskatchewan working with young people, helping them to tell their stories, helping them to dig out their stories. And for me, the most important things are memory and imagination. So that's how I think, that's how I dream, and that's how I make my connections. And when I started telling stories, I started as a clown character. And I painted my face, and I did my hair up in pigtails, and I wore funny clothes because I really wanted to be accepted. I really wanted people to listen to my stories. Though some days I knew that my stories, they weren't really very interesting. And then I realized, as I met more storytellers, that we all have a story. And every story is interesting. And by telling our stories, that we find those places where we connect. And if I tell a story in a small town in Saskatchewan, and it's a fishing story, and I ask the children, who here has been fishing? They all put up their hands. And so when I talk about the lake and how it sparkles, and I talk about how it smells and how it sounds, they know. They know because they have the memory. And if I tell that story in Toronto, in a school that's in the middle of a neighborhood where there aren't any trees, and there aren't very many parks, and the children live in big, tall apartment buildings, and I say, who's been fishing? And no one puts up their hand. What they have to have is imagination. So instead of making the connection through memory, they have to create something magical. And so I love stories. And I'm going to tell you a little story about some of the people that are connected to me and who made me who I am. Well, my grandma, she didn't have lots of toys. She didn't have stacks of books, trucks, teddy bears, and dolls. But she had everything to make her heart sing. She had a button on a string. Zing, zing, zing. I'm lucky. I get to spend a lot of time with my grandma. I get to have supper with her still every Sunday, almost. And I've spent time with her since I was a little girl. I remember sitting in her kitchen, and she'd make us breakfast, and she'd bring a blue melamine bowl to the table. And in that bowl, there were yellow eggs, bright, bright yellow eggs. And I asked my grandma, how do you get those eggs so yellow? And she'd give me the cooking advice. The very first cooking advice she gave me was, well, you have to brown the butter. You have to brown the butter, and that'll make the eggs golden. And it didn't matter how much I browned that butter. I couldn't make golden eggs. Because the difference was, we were on the farm. And the eggs that I had at home were the city eggs, the pale eggs that didn't taste like the eggs on the farm. But I still learned about cooking and about taste from my grandma. And when I think about everything that I love food almost more than anything else. And I love the taste of everything except asparagus. And so when I was a kid, I couldn't even swallow asparagus. I couldn't chew it. I couldn't get it into my mouth without the squeak of the asparagus driving me crazy. And I wanted to like it because my mom was a good cook. My grandma was a good cook. I was beginning to be a good cook. And so one day I was talking to my grandma, and I was saying, Grandma, I don't know why, but I don't like asparagus. And my grandma said, well, when I was pregnant with your Uncle Louis, way back before the war, we were on a military base. And while I was pregnant with Uncle Louis, everybody was cooking asparagus from their gardens in Ontario. And I was so sick. I couldn't handle the smell of it. I couldn't handle the taste of it. And I thought, what? There's something, because I'm connected to her. And that's the reason why I had such an aversion to asparagus. And I think about my grandma and that grandmother. I think about the tastes. And then my dad's mom lived in one of those little houses with the glass stucco in North Battleford. And with her, it was the smell. And so you'd walk into her little living room, and you could smell the Pentex cushions, the hand-crocheted cushions, and the dust, and African violets. And she would make us these little treats that she called friolis. And they were Spam lunch meat mashed with Velveeta cheese, pickled pimentos and green onions, all smashed together, and she'd put that on a white bun, and she'd slide it into the toaster oven. And I can remember that smell. And it is a very distinct smell, but I can still sometimes smell that smell. And the other smell with her was the smell of the rose lotion. The little pink bottles that look like little milk bottles, and my grandma smelled like that rose lotion. She had it in the bathroom on one of those metal stands over the toilet, and I can remember a blue toilet in their bathroom and a blue tub with that pink bottle. And looking at that pink bottle and seeing that, and now there are times when I smell that rose lotion when nobody's there. And then I think even farther back, and I think about the stories that we have, and the memories that I have, and the stories that we don't have, and the places that we have to use our imagination to fill in. And then the places where we just have those connections that just run through our blood. And one of those connections is to my great-grandmother on my dad's side. And no one knew my great-grandmother because even her son didn't know her. So one of the ways that I've followed in the footsteps of my grandmothers is that I had children. And the first time I was pregnant, I was really worried. And I remember from being at a prenatal class, and the nurses told us that if you consider what your worst case scenario is and what your best case scenario is, your birth experience should be somewhere right down the middle. And so in my mind, I was imagining, okay, if it's really bad, I'm going to be in a lot of pain. There's going to be drugs. There's going to be a lot of blood. It's going to be horrible. And if it's really good, it's going to be easy and a quick labor, and I'll have a beautiful baby. And so the day that I went into labor, every time I had a contraction, my son's heartbeat disappeared. And so they came at me with forceps, and at our prenatal class, they had said, nobody uses forceps anymore. We're just showing you this. And it was part of, here's the museum of birth implements. And they came at me with forceps, and I just said, no, you don't use that anymore. And they said, no, we need to get this baby out right now. And so I had my baby, and they had to call in extra people into the room. So here I was, 22 years old, young, innocent, modest, and I'm in the stirrups, and the doctor who's taking care of me is stitching and stitching and stitching. And in the room is also my son. And he's gray, and he's not breathing. And there's a doctor taking care of him, and a couple of nurses taking care of him. And they had to call Saskatoon. They had to call our ambulance. This was in Lloydminster. And so when I'm there, and I'm just wishing and I'm just praying that this baby's going to breathe. And I'm in the stirrups, and all these people are here. And then the air ambulance came, and so into the room there's the resident from the University Hospital, and there's a nurse, and there is an ambulance driver and the airplane pilot, and they all come into the room. And here I am surrounded by all of these people. And that's where my story is so different from my great-grandmother's story. Because my son did breathe. And I kept breathing. And with my great-grandmother, she didn't have a hospital room. And she didn't have 2 doctors in the room, and then 3 doctors in the room, and several nurses, and hospital, and ambulance drivers, and a helicopter pilot or an airplane pilot. There was her and my great-grandfather. And then there was just my great-grandfather and a baby. And so that story, though short, is a story that sits in my blood, and it is part of who I am and my connection to this place. And now I have 2 beautiful children, and I still have a grandmother, and I have a few stories.
We'll now hear from Eric Anderson, former CBC journalist and, well, one of the most active Saskatoon community members that I know. You should follow his Twitter feed. It's very entertaining. Eric shares 2 stories, and we've included one of them. This story is sort of what I call a paradigm shift. That's where our way of thinking or perception of something shifts from one way to another. In other words, stopping at a McDonald's drive-thru at nighttime, the lights may be on, but, well, listen for yourselves. Hey, it's Kevin. I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Just a quick reminder that the SaskScapes podcast is available for free on your favorite podcast app, or you can stream it from your browser. Check out the show notes for the link. On the SaskScapes homepage, you'll notice something new under the logo called SaskScapes Plus. You can't miss it. There's a big button saying support with a heart icon next to it. I'd love it if you could click on that button and help keep this podcast series going. When SaskScapes launched in May 2014, it was the first podcast in the province celebrating arts, culture, and heritage. In fact, you'd have been pretty hard-pressed to find any Saskatchewan podcasts. So I'd like to think that we paved the way. It's been because of your support that this podcast is now in its 9th year. Okay, that's it. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
Hello, my name is Eric Anderson. So I wanted to tell you two quick stories relating that have a theme of McDonald's and my cousin Troy and road trips to see concerts. The first one happens in 2001. I'm going to university in Calgary. Troy is living with me at the time. He's doing some work. And we love going to concerts. We love live music. And Troy said, the White Stripes are playing in Vancouver. We've got to go. And just because I'm living in Moose Jaw and you're living in Calgary doesn't mean that we can't go. So we went. We drove all the way to Vancouver. And we drove through the mountains and we stayed at my friend Tessa's place. And the three of us went to the concert, and it was a great show. But what you have to realize is the concert took place on a Sunday night, and Troy had to be back in Moose Jaw by 6 o'clock the next day for an exam. And so the concert ends at 11 p.m., and we've got about 19 hours to drive back, Troy does, back to Moose Jaw to make this exam. I think it was a midterm. Like, there was no way he could miss it. So I said, that's all right, Troy, like, we can do this. So the concert ends. It was a great show. And we hop in his truck and we start driving through the mountains. And I said, I'm going to be your best co-pilot. I'm going to stay awake the whole time and keep you awake and focus. And whenever you need me to drive, I'm going to do it. Well, about a half hour, we could maybe made it as far as Abbotsford, and I was asleep. So we're sleeping and we roll into the city of Kamloops. And Troy sort of nudges me awake and he says, I'm starving. This is like at 2 or 3 in the morning. And he's like, where would be a good place to stop? I said, let's just stop at McDonald's. And so we find a McDonald's and we roll into it. We roll into the drive-thru, and there's the light is on in the drive-thru, like on the menu, but no one's answering. We're like, hello, and no one's answering. But it's the sign said it's open 24 hours, so it's someone's got to be there, maybe some teenager that's fallen asleep or something like that. So we decided to roll up to the window because we're starving and we've got a long ways to go. And we roll up to the window and we look inside, and you know how in the drive-thru window you can see inside the McDonald's? Well, we look inside and see the McDonald's, and the inside is on fire. The McDonald's is on fire, and which is why Noah was responding when we were trying to order a quarter pounder with cheese, because the McDonald's is on fire. And we're like, oh my gosh, and we're like, is this really happening? Is it just because we're sleepy or not? And so we roll forward a bit, and on the whole other side of the building, like, there are flames shooting out of the McDonald's. And that's why we weren't able to order our quarter pounder with cheese, because the Kamloops McDonald's was on fire. So we just said, well, what are we going to do? And we just kept driving. And as we were driving away, the fire trucks were coming, and they were coming to rescue the Kamloops McDonald's. But Troy ended up making his exam on time, I think by like 15 minutes. When we were just driving past the McDonald's, it made me think of that. So, all right. Thank you, guys. Yeah, we got our food, yeah.
This next guest is someone with whom I'm very well acquainted. It's my mom. And oh, the stories we have to tell together. But Mom takes center stage to talk about life during World War II, and a life richly lived by saying one simple word: yes.
Hi. My name is Sylvia Power, and my story begins in London, England, where I was born in the East End of London. And life was quite good. I grew up in a beautiful suburb of London, southwest London, near Wimbledon, where they play tennis. And my childhood was quite happy. until September the 1st in 1939. I was 13, and our lives were changed forever because Britain was at war with Germany. And from then on, life was pretty scary. We had to run from our classrooms into air raid shelters quite often during the daytime in the Battle of Britain, and running home from school with fighter planes over our heads, shooting at each other, and shrapnel from the aircat guns falling all around us. And one hit from a piece of shrapnel can kill you. And then after the Battle of Britain was over, began the relentless night bombing of London. And every night the siren would go about 6 o'clock, and we would all run into a miserable little tiny wet shelter in our back garden, which wasn't heated, and all through the winter, instead of our nice warm house. And we lost friends and school friends and neighbors, and hundreds of people were killed every night. It was not a good time. And when I was 18, I decided I would join the army. And my father was already in the army. He was quite young. And this didn't go over very well with him. But I joined the army, and I was sent to a place called Didcot, in between Reading and Oxford. I was in the Ordnance Corps. And shortly after I arrived there, I went into the village with some of my friends, and we met a group of Canadian soldiers. And they were in the number 8 Canadian General Hospital in the Canadian Royal Army Medical Corps. And they were there to pick up their supplies to follow the troops over right after D-Day and set up field hospitals, something like MASH unit. And one of these Canadian boys was my future husband, Doug. And while they were in Didcot for about 2 weeks, and then they had to leave and go over on to the continent. And of course during those 2 weeks, we thought we were meant to be together. But when he said he would be back, I wasn't too sure about that, because life was very uncertain then. But sure enough, in about 10 months' time, he arrived back looking for me. And every time he had leave, he would come back to see me across the English Channel. We decided we were going to get married, and there were a lot of obstacles in our way. And it took about 2 years before we did get married. By then the war was over, but we were both still in the army. And he was posted back in England. And finally, we did get married. And shortly after the wedding, he had to return to Canada. And I was left there for 3 months, waiting for my orders to leave. And the day finally came. It was very exciting, but also very sad, because I left my beautiful London and all my family and friends and got on this boat full of hundreds of war brides. And we were at sea for 9 days until we arrived in Canada, Pier 21, Halifax, which is where Doug was from. So we stayed there and started our life together. And my husband, with the help of his father and brothers, started building a house for us. And while he was building the house, we lived in a one-room shack with no running water and an outside toilet in the woods, which was a little different from London, what I'd been used to. But it was all a big adventure, so it didn't bother me very much. Although most of the people in the village looked at me as though I had come from another planet. And took me many years to feel part of that community. But I grew to love everybody there, and we did what most young couples did in those days. We produced a lot of baby boomers. And we had 6 wonderful sons and a beautiful daughter. And they grew up, and a couple of them got married, and they all moved out west, with the exception of one who lives in New York. And we were there by ourselves. So 5 of them by that time had arrived in Saskatoon. So we decided to move to Saskatoon. And now we have 12 grandchildren and 13 great-grandchildren. And so I like to remind them that they're only here because I said yes. And our 70th wedding anniversary was in August. But unfortunately, my Doug was not with me because he passed away shortly before that. So here I am learning to live a life without him.
This next storyteller, at the age of 16, has had a relationship with hospitals for most of his younger years. His name is Spirit Rock. Now, how he was given that name is pretty cool in and of itself. A brave young man indeed, who was gracious enough to share some very honest feelings about growing up.
Hello, my name is Spirit Rock, but people call me Josh at the school. Now, I wish I had a story as eccentric as that was, but mine's on a more serious note. Right now, I'm 16 years old, and just judging by my age, people may think that I don't have much of a life story right now. But really, I have a surprising amount to tell, just even with my age. I was always a sick child. I always got ill very easily at a young age. I always spent my childhood in a hospital bed. And, given that, I couldn't attend a lot of school, or I couldn't exercise a lot. And that's actually the reason why my grandfather, or my mushroom, as you would say in Cree, gave me my name, my Cree name, Spirit Rock. Basically, the meaning behind that name was strong like a rock, physically, and my spirit as well. That's the whole reason why he gave me my name. But yeah, he always hoped for me to get better and get more strong and not get as sick as much. And now, at the present, I'm doing fairly well. I'm not getting sick as much as I did when I was younger. But I'm here to tell you a story today about, this was one of the stories where I was in the hospital, and my story of recovery. It was a nice day. The sun was shining, it wasn't raining, and we thought we'd have a barbecue, right? Just to celebrate this nice day, or just for no reason at all. My mother, she brought out this grill from the basement, I believe, and she put the grill down in one side of the of my backyard, and I was about 7 at the time, around that time, and I didn't know any better, so I was just running around, doing nothing, really laughing, not really aware of my surroundings as you would be now as an adult or a teenager. So she brought out the grill, right? And she plugged it in with an extension cord running into my kitchen. And, she said very clearly to all my brothers and me and everyone, in the house or in the backyard, to, don't trip over this cord. Do not run around this cord. So no, we block that in, right? Okay, don't run around that cord. And then she brought out this barbecue. She put a frying pan on it, like this big old frying pan, right? It's like used for making bannock, like grease bannock. So there's very hot grease there. That's why she told us to not mess around. So long story short, she was making bannock, as you would. And then I was playing a Game Boy Color at the time. And I'm the youngest of 5 other brothers, right? No sisters in my immediate family. So, I was playing my Game Boy Color, and my older brother, I'm the youngest, so my older brother took it from me and went running around the backyard, right? So I was like, hey, it's my turn. I went chasing after him, and eventually we got to the cord. He jumped over it, right? And I was so fixated on getting that Game Boy Color, I didn't look at the ground. I was only looking straight ahead at him. So I tripped on the cord, and the entire frying pan full of boiling hot grease fell onto me. And it made a puddle, literally a puddle of boiling hot grease. And at the time, it was excruciating pain. And I was a kid at the time, so I just don't know what happened. And I was just on the ground, rolling, scratching at my leg. Basically, where the grease fell was all over my lower left leg. So everything below my left knee is completely scarred. I still have the scars to this day, and that's why I avoid pools, shorts, anything that reveals the scars that I have. And we called the ambulance, and they got there, and they realized if we don't get him into cold water now, then all his nerves and he won't be able to use his left leg at all. So basically what they had to do was fill my bathtub with cold water to the brim. The paramedics put me in the water, and that basically dispersed the grease from my leg. So I basically got sort of rid of the grease. But if they hadn't done that simple action, I would have not been able to use my left leg at all. The nerves would have been totally fried, and I had to spend God knows how long of a time recovering in a hospital. That took up a big chunk of my childhood. And I just wish, my only regret is that I shouldn't have cared so much about that Game Boy Color. Literally, like, Pokemon is not that important to lose your lower left leg. I don't like the hospitals. I really don't. I realize what they do. I realize that they help countless people, like, recover from whatever situation they're in. But you can't, when you're constantly in the hospital, you can't help but remember all the negative feelings that you've felt over the time that you were there. But if I didn't have them, even though I have all these negative feelings towards them, they help me, and they're the reason why I can attend school normally as I do now. And I guess I should thank hospitals for that. That's my story.
Thank you. Peace. That is the name of our next speaker, who is a spoken word artist. But first of all, how beautiful is her name? Peace. Listen as she shares a few of the differences between her birth country of Nigeria and Canada, where she now lives. By the end of this story, see how many of you are looking around the room you're in, deciding which lights don't need to be on.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Peace Akitade, like actual peace, and I'm a spoken word artist, and I've never been to a story slam, so I never knew that was a real thing. I learned something new today. That's good. I guess I'm going to do a story about the difference between Nigeria and Canada, where I come from. So, in Nigeria, when you're young, we don't do Christmas. Like, we actually do it since we're Christians, but we don't actually do it. And the reason is because there's a lot of kidnapping in there. My sister is too young to know this, and my brother wasn't even relevant to this, so just forget about him. So these people, young men, have the tendency of dressing up like Santa Claus and coming to your door. They'll knock 2 times, and a dumb kid that the parents are not at home will open the door, and they will have a sack, and you think that it's with gifts and toys and candy, but it's actually a sack to kidnap you in. So Santa Claus was actually feared in Nigeria. So when we came to Canada, my dear Canada, and we came to Saskatoon, and it was Christmas time, and we went to the mall, checking out all the culture and different things, and we see a Santa Claus man standing there with a baby in his lap. And the baby is smiling down at the Santa Claus like if it's the best thing that ever happened to him. And I'm just there looking at, it's going to kidnap him. It's going to kidnap him. And I'm running there, going there. What's going on? It's going to kidnap you. And then the person that is picturing now looks at me and says, what's going on? Why are you doing that? And the Santa Claus just takes down his beard. And I'm just like, what? And he's looking at me and he's just like, do you want a picture too? And I look at them, and my mom she's embarrassed. She's just going away. I'm no more her daughter anymore. And they're just walking away. My family is just walking away. And I'm just standing. Is nobody looking at this? Is nobody seeing what's going on? So I just leave it and go away. I ask my teacher when I'm in school, and she tells me that in here, it doesn't happen. That's one thing. And Santa Claus is actually someone that gives you gifts. That's a big thing. So thank you, Canada, for telling me about that important thing. And I should have known about that before I went to the mall. Okay, so another story, a second one about how Nigeria is different than Canada. It's electricity. We don't have electricity in Nigeria. And anytime there can just be lights out. It will just be black. And whenever it's black, there's 2 things that happen whenever everything turns black. One, everybody groans. You can hear it even if you're outside, you can hear it. Everyone just groans. It's just a big, loud groan. And another one we have is that we say, on NEPA. That means that no light. So I come to Canada, and you guys have the tendency, I'm not saying anything about you guys, you have a tendency of wasting electricity, which I do not like. So I'm walking outside, and I remember the time when I was young, and I'll be walking outside, and I'm carrying the groceries in my head, and everything will turn black. And it's the night, and then the stars will be out, and it's a beautiful moment because of everything's glittering, and it's good, and it feels like I'm part of the world. I come here, and it's the night time, and you guys still have it on, and the light is still on there. There's no stars up there. It's just black. And I am so scared because I feel like if I'm no more part of the world since there's no stars up there. And then we now went to the trip outside to Regina. I think it was our first time going to Regina. And it was dark. This was when we were coming to Canada, not after we've stayed for a long time. So it was dark and the stars were so bright. I didn't even know that would happen. And this was before I knew about the Northern Lights. And the stars were so bright, brighter than in Nigeria. And I was so happy about that. And I came to the city and there's no stars. And I feel like they just ran away from me. So that's 2 things that happened that are different from Nigeria and Canada. But I still love the place. And still, thank you for letting me tell you your story.
Tell them how old you are.
Oh, yes. Okay, so you guys are very weird. You think that I am 20 years old and a mom. I'm actually 14. So, yeah.
Continuing with the voices of our younger guests, this 12-year-old has been birthday challenged for quite a few years now. You'll hear what that means. And I said to her afterwards, "Are you sure you really want to turn 13?
Hi.
Hi. Before we start, how old do you think I am? 12. So the story that I'm going to do is about my birthday. So the birthdays that I have are mostly bad luck. Though when I was turning 10, we went swimming and one of the boys just stripped naked in front of my face and started going around the circles and telling me that happy birthday, happy birthday. And then when I was turning 11, there was a blackout and a thunderstorm. And then when I was turning 12, a kid got sick and puked all over me. I think when I was 7 or 8, my dad moved us away from the place where I was going to have my birthday party. After that, when I had my birthday, the plane started to rumble and there were loud noises and I got really scared. And when we landed, I felt so sick and it was snowing then and it was so cold. Then after that, when I think I turned 9, wow, this one's a really bad one. I got bitten by a dog and I fell in a mud puddle and there was another thunderstorm and I almost got electrocuted. Thank you.
We'll now hear from Kristen, who shares a story where family ties are all that matter. There is book smart and life smart, and both have their place. And this is a story of how Kristen's brother showed her life smarts, and in doing so demonstrates just how strong of a man he has become and how much she admires him for that.
Okay. So one of the previous stories about some stairways got me thinking about a story about my brother. So I'm going to tell you a story about my brother. So my brother's 4 years younger than me, and growing up, I was always really good at school. Like I was one of those kids that just did really well in school and got really good grades, and it all worked out really well. And my brother was one of those kids that lots of people, educational system works really well for lots of people, but not necessarily everyone. So my brother didn't work out so well for him, so he didn't have as good grades and things like that. Although he turned out fantastic in the end. He essentially built himself a house, built him and his family a house, mostly by himself, in High River after High River was flooded when where they were living was destroyed. So he's fantastic. And this is a little bit of a story about him and maybe the first time that I realized just how fantastic he was. So it was tough growing up. I always got really good grades. I was kind of a big, older, mean sister sometimes. And so anyway, this story takes place in Prince Albert. We'd gone to visit my grandmother, and we had gone and stayed overnight, and my whole family, we'd gone to church. And so it was Sunday morning, and we'd gone to church all together. And it was one of these big, older churches in Prince Albert that had a big, long flight of stairs kind of leading up to the front doors, the big front doors. And so we'd gone to church, so service was over, and the grown-ups were all inside talking. My brother and I were hanging out on top of these steps like kids do, just in the sunshine, waiting for our parents to come. And so out from the front doors comes these two elderly women with arm in arm, arms linked together. I remember they were wearing pillbox hats. They had their Sunday best on. They'd come to church, and now they were going home together. So they go arm in arm, and they start down this long flight of steps. And they start down, and the one that's kind of a little bit in front just stumbles just a little bit. And she doesn't lose her footing, but she just stumbles a bit, and she starts to kind of go faster down the staircase. And so she's going faster and faster, and she's trying to regain her balance, but she can't. And she's going faster and faster, and she's pulling the other little old lady with her down this staircase. And she's going faster and faster and faster. And to everyone who's watching, it's obvious that any second now they're going to lose their footing, and they're going to roll down the staircase, and there's going to be broken hips everywhere, and this is going to be just a disaster. And so I'm standing there, and I'm watching this, and I'm standing there on top of the steps, and it doesn't occur to me to do anything. It doesn't even occur to me to do anything to stop this from happening. I'm just watching this happen. And from my right, I see there's a little blur, and it's my brother. and he runs beside me, and he runs down the stairs, and he catches up with the little old ladies, and he quickly hooks his arm under the nearest one's arm, and he stops, and he leans back, and he pulls them, and he stops them from falling down the stairs, and he stops this catastrophic descent that they're making, and he stops them from falling, and the disaster has been averted, and he's kept them from falling, and he just acted, just really quickly, and these two women were just so happy, and they just beamed at him. And they were just glowing, and they were just telling him what an incredibly fantastic young man he was, that he had saved them from this terrible fall they were about to have. And he just kind of took it in stride and shook it off, and just patting their hands, and they thanked him so much, and they went to finish going down the stairs, and they went on their way. And I was so proud in that moment, and that was when I realized that there are different ways to be strong and different ways to be really good. And that was maybe the first time I realized just what a strong young man my brother was. And so that's my story. Thank you.
Well, this next speaker needs no introduction. I'm sure you'll figure out who it is. This is a story where the mistake of a bunch of bullies led him to a career path where he could celebrate the talents of the people who have been marginalized themselves.
I was teased pretty much from kindergarten all the way to grade 12. I don't have more than a couple of good memories in 12 years of schooling. And I was teased during a time where bullying wasn't supported the same way it is now. There was no helpline to call. There were no safe places in schools. There was just me and my ability somehow to keep it all together. Actually never saw the inside of any washroom of any school that I went to because it wasn't even safe for me to go in the washroom by myself. So fast forward to grade 12, and I'm graduating. And the high school yearbook committee decided that they would have one last joke on me. So we were all to have our photographs taken, and then we would write a little bio of, hopes and dreams and aspirations, things that we wanted to go on to do. And of course, my dream at the time was going to a conservatory of music to study music. And I grew up in a very small town where studying music really wasn't high on the list of things that you did. People aspired to get a trade and do something practical. And so I was very much an outsider for being this artsy musician type. So the joke they played on me was that they did not include my photo with the graduating class of grade 12. They put me in the back of the book with a small group of students who were part of a learning disability and challenged group. And these kids weren't necessarily graduating from a grade 12 program because they were not advanced enough to actually go through the full school system. So there I am in the back with this lofty bio next to my picture, compared to a lot of kids that did not have dreams or aspirations close to mine. And I still have that yearbook, and it's still very weird to open it up and see that I'm not with the graduating class. And I used to think, what must it be like to be like our class valedictorian, Stephen? He had, I think, 4 scholarships that he got to choose from for what university he wanted to go to. He was the captain of all the sports teams. He had all the girls. He was just Mr. Perfect. And I thought, why do I have to be this geek? Why can't I be Stephen? Well, it probably turned out to be to my advantage that I wasn't, because years later I found out that Stephen passed away in his sleep from a heart issue at the age of 22. And so my first lesson was not to envy people. And I suppose that it was a challenge to forget that I was in that special education page. But I was lucky enough to go on to have my dream career as a stage actor and a film actor and a Broadway singer. And so I fulfilled the dream nonetheless. And one of the great opportunities that I have is to give back through adjudicating music festivals. And I will be doing that for my 17th year this season across Canada. And I adjudicated one girl who was, I think, 14 or 15. And she got up on stage and had a parent set up this elaborate set around her. Usually when I see a big set going up around a kid, that usually means they're not the greatest singer in the world, and they're hoping that all the stuff on the stage will mask the fact that they're not gifted in the vocal department. But this kid got up there and just, my jaw was on the floor. And not only did she use the set, she actually became part of the set and became this beautiful gem of a performance. And so she won her class for being absolutely brilliant, and I've never forgotten her performance. But more importantly, what I remember is that her parents came up to me afterwards, and they had tears in their eyes, and they said, "Thank you so much for what you've done for our daughter. She's never done anything like this before in her life. This is the first time in festival, and she belongs to a special education group in her school for learning challenged. And this was something that she could never have imagined herself doing, let alone winning. And we can't believe that she has that kind of gift to be able to do that. And we thank you so much for recognizing that." So in hindsight, that kid was pretty cool, and she really honestly deserved the place that she got. So maybe I'm thinking it wasn't so bad to be included in the back page of my high school yearbook with learning challenge kids, because some of the greatest memories have been those very kids in Music Festival today.
Our final story reminds us of the sobering truth behind the legal system and the decisions adjudicators have to make on case claims involving atrocities such as those in the residential schools. This lawyer represents some of those people behind those claims. As you'll hear in the pacing of his speech patterns, this is an emotionally charged issue for him, a job that he finds sometimes so rewarding and other times so terribly difficult.
Hi, everyone. I'm a lawyer in a process where people are compensated for abuse that they've suffered in residential schools. It's called the independent assessment process. And I've ran probably about 400 claims in the past 5 years. And people, like, they sat in my office and they tell these stories that are really, like, they're heartbreaking. They don't, like, you don't hear these stories every day. And they expect me to help them. And I help them. I do the best thing that I can. But sometimes when they tell their story, I have to make sure, that there's a chance for them to, be recognized in this process, this independent assessment process. And that's not always the case. And that kind of breaks my heart. Because they get up, they trust me enough to tell their story, they go through all the motions. Something usually 95% of the time is really terrible has happened to them in these schools. And I take them through the steps. I modify their applications. I do all the legalistic stuff. We go to the hearing. And they tell their story. Like they usually, like, 95% of the time, they do a really good job. And they thank me, they shake everybody's hand. Like there's a hug, you know, they hug the adjudicator, they hug the person from Canada that's supposed to be there, they hug me. It's usually a really good experience. But sometimes, like those 5% of the times, it's not. Because if you've been abused to the extent that sometimes that I hear, sometimes you don't want to think about it. You don't want people to know like what's happened to you, because you think, well, what if they think I'm lying? Like, would a person of God do that to somebody? Because a lot of priests and other religious figures would run these schools, and they get messed up. They go into the hearing and they think, oh, I don't know what to say. And these adjudicators, some of them are really good. Some of the adjudicators are really good, but some of them are just like, they're assholes. And they pry into the claimants, and they give them a really hard time, and they really peel off layers. And the claimants are sitting there like deers in headlights. They're like, well, I thought this was supposed to be a healing process, like a process of reconciliation. Like, that's what they're thinking, right? Inside their heads. Like, they think that this is going to help. If their story, if they tell somebody about it, it's going to help. But some of them just get ripped to shreds. And I don't know what to do, what to tell them after that happens. And then they get a decision in the mail saying, well, we couldn't compensate you because, you know, you messed up, and the records that we have, they say this, and you can't remember exactly which years you were in the school, so you get nothing. And then I have to call them. I have to call them and say, well, this is the evidence you gave at this hearing was not enough. And he's like, pardon? They say to me, like, what do you mean it's not enough? Like, I said, it wasn't enough. You know, you have to break them softly, because they don't know all of the legal maneuvers that these adjudicators, like you mentioned adjudicating, that's why I came up here. These legal adjudicators do to find, you know, this. I don't believe this happened to you. It's tough. It's really tough. But 95% of the time, it's okay. But it's those 5% and those adjudicators that just don't get it that I really, really hate. That's my story. Sorry, that's a bit of a downer. But yeah, that's how I feel. Thanks.
Hey, thanks for listening. Music for SaskScapes is provided by Saskatchewan-born singer-songwriter Jeffrey Straker. It's so exciting to see SaskScapes being downloaded by a global audience. Remember, if you're in Saskatchewan and have a story that needs to be heard, contact me about how you can become a sponsor. Stories from our past and our present, they're all waiting to be told from here in the land of the living skies. So until next time...